All right, I've gotten a few questions here. This is Geometry Lesson 8.1 on page 435. This is problem number 9, so the last problem on the assignment. We are asked to solve for the values for x and y on this problem. So eventually, we need to come up with x equals and y equals for our answer. Now, in order to do this, it's going to be helpful to look back on page 434, the box at the very bottom of that page, which explains theorem 8.3, talking about the altitude being drawn from the right angle, forming a right angle or a perpendicular line with the opposite side. So here we've got triangle ABC with altitude CD drawn in. And again, we're going to look at those proportions that they have as examples in that theorem 8.3 box in order to come up with values for x and y. So the first one, in order to come up with our value for x, we could do either one first, but I'm going to go ahead and solve for x first. So in order to solve for x, what I need to do is I need to look at the second example proportion that they give on page 434. But instead of using x, y, z, and w, here we have a, b, c, and d. So our proportion in order to find x is going to be segment AB over segment AC, and that's going to be set equal to AC over AD. Now, just a reminder, when you're setting up these proportions for geometric means, the denominator of the first ratio and the numerator of the second ratio will always be the same anytime you're finding geometric means. So I need to go ahead and find or plug in my values for these different segments. So for segment AB, we have BD, which is x, and AD, which is 2. So that entire segment would be the sum of those two segments. So x plus 2. Now in this case, we need to find a value for segment AC. We are not given a value for that segment, but we know that triangle ACD is a right triangle, meaning we can use the Pythagorean theorem to come up with the length of our hypotenuse AC there. So we're going to go ahead and say that to find AC, we're going to say 2 squared plus 2 times the square root of 3 squared is equal to c squared. Now 2 squared, we get 4. 2 times the square root of 3 squared. Since this is in parentheses, we need to square everything within the parentheses. So 2 squared becomes 4. The square root of 3 squared. When you have a square root of a number and you square it, the square root sign and the square cancel, leaving just 3. So we're going to have 4 times 3, and it's equal to c squared. So now we've got 4 plus 12 equals c squared. 4 plus 12 is 16. Now to get rid of our squared, we're going to take the square root. Again, square root and square cancel. We get c is equal to 4. So c in this case is representing our segment AC, so we're going to put 4 there. So AC becomes 4, so we have x plus 2 over 4 is equal to 4 over AD, which is 2. So now in this case, if we go ahead and solve, we need to cross multiply, so we get 2 times x plus 2 is equal to 4 times 4, so 16. Distribute our 2, we get 2x plus 4 equals 16. Subtract our 4 over, 2x equals 12. Last step, divide by 2. And we end up with x equals 6. So we know that x here, I'm going to go ahead and erase my x and put in 6 since we know that's the value there now. So we've solved for x, now we need to solve for y. We're not going to have to do any of this extra work. We already have all of the values we need for y. In this case, we're going to look at the first example proportion that they have in theorem 8.3. And our proportion is going to end up being AB over BC is equal to BC over BD. Now again, denominator on the first side and numerator on the second side will always be the same since we're working with geometric means. So in this case, for segment AB, over here we had x plus 2, but now we know that x is 6, so we can add BD and AD, and that whole segment is going to be 8. Segment BC is y, so 8 over y is equal to y over BD. BD we know is 6. Now again, in order to solve here, we're going to cross multiply. So y times y gives us y squared equals 48. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides, those cancel. Y equals the square root of 48. Now 48 is not a perfect square, again, meaning that if you take the square root of 48, you're going to end up with a decimal as an answer. We don't want to give the decimal as an answer because we want an exact answer. If we give the decimal, we have to round it, meaning that it's an approximate answer. But the square root of 48 can be simplified. So if you guys remember going back a little bit, if we look at the square root of 48, there's a perfect square that goes into 48. The largest perfect square that goes into 48 is 16. So we can say the square root of 48 is equal to the square root of 16 times 3. Then if we break those up, square root of 16 times the square root of 3. Square root of 16 is 4. We're going to keep the square root of 3 to keep it an exact answer. So we can say y is equal to 4 times the square root of 3. So we would say here y equals 4 root 3. And there's our two answers, x equals 6, y equals 4 times the square root of 3. Hopefully this makes a little bit more sense for you guys now. Remember, continue to feel free to text me, email me, call me if you guys are coming up with any questions as you're working through this. I'll put up a note for you guys, but as you're working through these 3 assignments, once you've finished all of them, just send me an email with pictures of all 3 of your assignments. When we get back from spring break, I'll be sending something out to all of you as far as what things are going to look like for the rest of April, as far as me sending out the lessons, how to turn in your homework, all of those different things. So that information will be coming soon. But as you're working on these 3 again, please feel free to be reaching out and asking any questions you come up with. And have a great spring break.